We on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot, season number 5, episode number 25. And yeah, man, we right back up in this thing, man. I appreciate you guys checking in. Know it's been a hot little minute before I checked in with you guys, but we got a jam-packed episode. This episode, season 5, episode number 25. As always, man, if this is your first time listening to We on Fire Sports Podcast, the spot, we provide hot fire takes and analysis across the sporting landscape. And if you're an OG of the show, man, I appreciate the check-in once again, one more again, as we crank this thing up, man. We're officially in the Super Bowl week. We just had, Media Day is what they call now. Super Bowl opening night that kicked off a couple days ago, man. But Super Bowl coming up on Sunday, man. We're going to put a nice little bow around Super Bowl, man. Just all the traditions, man. All the kicking it, all the eating, all the relaxing, all the rooting on your friend, rooting for your team with your friends, all the drinking. Some of y'all smoking, man. We just out here up in this thing, man. So Super Bowl 60 coming up this Sunday, man, between the New England Patriots, Drake May and Mike Vrabel and company. Also, we got the Seattle Seahawks, man, with Coach McDonald and Sam Darnold in the building. Redemption tour for Sam Darnold. And so we're going to crack that thing open, man. We're going to break down the Super Bowl a little bit, in this episode. But, man, this one going to be about, man, these trades, man, in the NBA. The NBA is definitely taking the main stage over the last couple of days as the trade deadline is tomorrow, man, for the NBA, and there's been a lot of big time moves, and I'm gonna get into it. I'm gonna break it all down, man. But just surprisingly, obviously the breaking news, of the day was Anthony Davis being traded to the Washington Wizards. He goes to the Wizards. Basically the Dallas Mavericks. They bring in Chris Middleton and a whole bunch of I'm not gonna call them inexcusable or disposable NBA players, but it's just a cast of characters, man. And, Dallas, this definitely puts a bow on what most people consider the worst trade in NBA history. Now, I'm not going to go out there and say it's the worst trade in NBA history, but it's definitely probably, in my personal opinion, probably a top 5 worst trade I've ever seen, not only in NBA history, but probably in the history of professional sports. We've seen a lot of bogus trades. I know I have, man, over the last 40 years of covering, the great world of sports, peeping game on the great world of sports. And for me, just Anthony Davis, man, just Mr. Get Hurt. I'm watching Anthony Davis, obviously from the same hometown as myself, Chicago. Watching Davis as a high school guy, man, growing from 6'3" to 6'10", seemingly overnight, coming to number 1 recruit in the country, going to the University of Kentucky, winning the national championship there, going down to New Orleans, kicking it down there in New Orleans, then getting shipped out to the Los Angeles Lakers, winning the championship in the in the bubble with LeBron James. I thought he should have been the NBA Finals MVP, but that's a story for another day. And it's just been kind of up and down, man. He got traded obviously to Dallas for Luka Doncic, as I aforementioned, and now he's in another home, man, in the capital, Washington D.C. Man, joins Trae Young, and I'm just gonna break this down, man, real quickly, man, from a Dallas standpoint. Obviously, the Dallas Mavericks right now, man, they just all in on Cooper Flagg. Cooper Flagg has had an outstanding rookie season, man, so far. He's probably going to win the Rookie of the Year, man. It's between him and Con Knipple, his former teammate at Duke University. And so, for me, I just think that the Dallas Mavericks are just trying to lay the table out, man, for Cooper Flagg. Obviously, we still have Kyrie Irving that's still injured in the fold with the Dallas Mavericks. We'll see when Kyrie comes back. We'll see if the Dallas Mavericks are going to make the decision to move on from Kyrie Irving. That's a story for another day. But it's all obviously in the standpoint now is that, Dallas is just laying out the table, setting up the table, man, just for Cooper Flagg, just to seeing what he does, just for the next generation of the Dallas Mavericks. And, the funny thing about, say, the Dallas Mavericks is, for me, kudos to the organization. They just, retired, man, one of the greatest players to ever play for the Dallas Mavericks, and Mark Aguirre, from my neighborhood, man, went to the same high school, Western House High School in Chicago, man, definitely a legend up there, starred at DePaul. So I'm tipping my cap, man, to Mark Aguirre, man. I thought it was well deserved that they, raised his, raised his jersey, up there down in Dallas, man. But the Mavericks, Again, they move on from Davis. I thought it was the right thing to do from a standpoint of, the guys are Mr. Get Hurt. And it's kind of hard for me to kind of rail on, one of my Chi-Town brethren. But at the end of the day, man, you got to be available. And if you're not available, you become expendable. And, that's kind of the litmus test for a lot of these little trades we've seen so far. We've got a couple guys who have been kind of out and been on the mend just a little bit, and they're no longer with their team. I just think for the Washington Wizards, they big game hunting. They was able to bring in Trae Young from the Atlanta Hawks. Obviously, now they're able to bring in Anthony Davis. It gives kind of their fan base at least some name recognition. I think that the Washington Wizards, with Alex Sarr, I think that he's a decent young player. I think that there's still, some growth for Alex Sarr. Playing with a guy with Anthony Davis, maybe learn a little bit from Anthony Davis. And so we'll see, what the Wizards do moving forward. But I kind of like what they was able to do. I'm not going to front, because this team was basically an outpost of just the unforgotten basketball players across the league, whether it be a Kyle Kuzma, whether it be a Chris Middleton. And so now, they kind of put their chips into the table as far as getting at least 2 former All-Stars, to give themselves a name recognition. DC, just that whole area in DC, man, it's a passionate fan base. I got love for them up there, man. So hopefully they're able to stack these 2 pieces with a couple other pieces and see what their organization do moving forward. So we'll definitely see what that do. But that was definitely big time news that jumped off, a couple hours ago. Also, we had some, trade news with, the Los Angeles Clippers. They move on from Chris Paul. He goes to the Toronto Raptors. It looks like the Raptors are basically probably going to go ahead and waive him. So I think Chris Paul probably be a free agent. Also, another guy just in that situation is Lonzo Ball. Got traded from the Cleveland Cavaliers to the Utah Jazz. Looks like he's going to be in a situation where the Jazz is probably going to release him. He's going to become a free agent as well. We also, too, got the young and McClain, man, formerly at Duke University with the Sixers, got traded to Oklahoma City. 4 bevy of picks, couple second-round picks. I think there's a first-round pick in there kind of protected just in that deal. And so there's been a lot of movement across the National Basketball Association over the last 48 to 72 hours. We got into, or we'll get into James Harden coming up a little bit later on in the show in the next salvo. Just break that whole situation down for him moving on from the Los Angeles Clippers to the Cleveland Cavaliers. As Cleveland kind of puts themselves now probably in a situation where they may have a puncher's chance of getting out of the East. I do think the East is up for grabs. We'll get into that just a little bit later on as well. So there's been a lot of things, man, cracking just coming up, man, just in the last, 72 to 48 hours across the National Basketball Association. We're definitely going to get into and peel these onions back on a lot of these moves. And so it's definitely going to jump off. The jump off is kicked off in the NBA. Obviously, there's another piece, another huge piece that's kind of dangling out there. Big time piece that's dangling out there, and that's Giannis Antetokounmpo. Not sure, what the Milwaukee Bucks is going to do. Word on the street is the Golden State, they pushed all their chips in the middle of the table. Just basically praying and hoping that, the Milwaukee Bucks accept their offer. We'll see what that do. That might come down the pipeline as early as tomorrow. So we'll definitely see about that. So there's a lot of teams that still kind of out here in just the orbit, just trying to see what they're going to do. Also, too, for my people up in Chi-Town, man, my Chicago Bulls moved on from Kobe White. They traded him to the Charlotte Hornets. I just think that for me, I already seen the writing on the wall with just the various moves that the Bulls was able to do over the last 48 hours, and I'll get into that a little bit as well. But today, the thing dropped down with Kobe White. It was an exceptional Chicago Bull. I was a fan of Kobe White. He's definitely a walking bucket. Not gonna give you a lot on the defensive end, but he definitely was a walking bucket. And so, man, I took my hat to the man. Man, he was a consummate professional in Chicago. Held it down, but he got a new home, and I'll get into that. Obviously, the Bulls able to get Colin Sexton. We got 1,000,001 guards, and a lot of people just having mixed feelings about the whole situation with the Chicago Bulls and what they doing moving forward. I still think that the best foot forward for the Chicago Bulls is definitely to fire Arturas Karnisovas and also to Mark Eversley. I think both of those gentlemen should be shown the door. They have no direction, no plan. And at the end of the day, you got Anthony Davis and so forth out here. And you look what the Washington Wizards was able to do to get to Anthony Davis. You don't think the Bulls should have made a move such as that? Bring this guy back home into the fold. At least try to kick the tires on that situation. And so, as I said once again with my Chicago Bulls, they got baby nuts and they treat the organization like it's a corner store bodega instead of one of the biggest markets in the country as far as sports is concerned, with a passionate fan base, man. So really kind of saddened just by the moves of my Chicago Bulls, man. But again, like I said, there's a lot of movement across the NBA, man. We'll talk a little bit about the Super Bowl on the back end of this episode, man. But coming up, I got another in-depth breakdown, man, of all these trades and all this movement across the National Basketball Association. First and foremost, man, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate you. Yeah. We on Fire Sports Podcast. That's right. Man, as promised, man, we're going to get into this NBA, man. NBA is heating up. Obviously, we got the Super Bowl coming up on Sunday, man. And after Sunday, football take a little bit of a back seat, man, to the NBA, man. And things are heating up, across the NBA as we got the trade deadline, man. And, obviously, I know you guys have heard, man, the breaking news, man. James Harden, man, traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers for Darius Garland. There's been a lot of trades jumping off, man. So we're going to get into it, Jeopardy speed round version just of this whole thing, man. And first and foremost, James Harden traded from the Los Angeles Clippers to the Cleveland Cavaliers for Darius Garland. This thing is just unfolding, and as the story goes, man. And to me, this is interesting enough, man. And those who are, OGs of the show, man, know just how I feel about James Harden. I just think that this guy is just all about me, fi me. And it's so funny, man. It is so funny that I almost got tricked. Into thinking that James Harden had actually turned the corner. Now, I thought that James Harden out there in Los Angeles, his hometown, playing for the Los Angeles Clippers, been playing some good ball this season, had a good year last season, third in the league in assists so far this season, man, averaging over a dub a game, man, playing some good ball. A lot of people thought he should have been an all-star this season, and the Los Angeles Clippers, this was a team that was in the dumps. They was in the dumps the first, basically month of the season. But, man, basically since the holidays, since Christmas time, this has been one of the hottest teams in the National Basketball Association. They had the whole fiasco with Chris Paul sending them home in the middle of the night, just letting him go by the wayside. And, Kawhi Leonard with the whole, situation with the ghost job, him and Steve Ballmer, the owner of the Los Angeles Clippers, we had that, jumping off, at the beginning of the season. And I just didn't think that, things in Clipperland would get even worse. But it has. And James Harden, typical James Harden, man. And to me, I ain't going to front, man. The only people that I really feel bad for, man, is the bona fide Clipper fans. Whether it's, my man Clipper Darrell out there in Los Angeles, whether it's, just everybody who rock with the Clippers, man. Just, my man Wiley, man, just everybody who rock with Freddie Munoz, everybody who I know that is a Clipper fan right now, man, is just rolling over in their grave right now, man, because it's just a situation where the Clippers are going to clip. And to me, they should have known when they, laid in the bed with James Harden and also to Kawhi Leonard in so many respects, especially with Harden, that at some point this dude was going to turn cold on you. At some point, whether it be during the regular season, whether it be, doing his, infamous ghost jobs, that we've seen this guy have in numerous playoff series. At some point, you knew the real James Harden was going to show up. And this time, he pulled it again. And, it was so funny, man, because when he went to Los Angeles, I said, man, this is it. He ain't going to pull no more wool over no more of these NBA teams and try to get himself out of Dodge and go to a situation that's fruitful for him. But I'll be damned, the man then did it again, man. And for Cleveland, to me, I just think that Cleveland is not really a situation where I don't think James Harden helped this team. And I seen, Kendrick Perkins on television. I seen some other talking heads on television saying that this deal is going to help, the Cleveland Cavaliers. And at the end of the day, you already got a ball dominant guy in Donovan Mitchell, who, I'm a big Donovan Mitchell fan. But I just don't see him and James Harden just coinciding. Now, obviously, there was a situation with Darius Garland and just his injury situation. It seemed like his toe, man, is just going to be hurt the whole season. I actually like what the Cleveland Cavaliers have done with this deal. I actually like what the Los Angeles Clippers has actually got. Darius Garland, the 26-year-old guard. You know, like I said, he's been kind of banged up this season. But, you know, you got you a young guard now. You know, man. And James Harden, he's 36 years old. So, you know, I don't know how much tread is going to be on that tire anyway with James Harden. And so, to me, you know, with Cleveland, you know, there's a, you know, word on the street is some more deals that they're going to, you know, make. Then obviously, they still in a big game hunting situation with Giannis Antetokounmpo. And so we'll see, you know, if this is kind of like a, you know, just kind of a precursor to these other moves that Cleveland may make. But, you know, from the onset, the Clippers, man, you know, at the end of the day, they did get a 26-year-old, you know, former all-star guard. You know, I think that there's still a lot of tread, obviously, on Garland's tires. And, you know, we'll see what that do moving forward, man. But this team, whether it's the whole situation with Paul George, you know, letting go, you know, giving, you know, obviously Oklahoma City 899 draft picks, including Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And to me, Lawrence Frank, the general manager of the Los Angeles Clippers, I just don't see, like, this guy, man, is just making moves on moves, and they just seem not to get the Clippers in the right direction. But it's not like we've seen the Clippers in the right direction before. This is a team that's been synonymous. You know, I remember the Clippers from the 1980s and the 1990s, where it was just a dumpster fire all the way around. And so, you know, for this team, you know, to bring in Kawhi Leonard, that was a big time move. But that move has been under scrutiny from a standpoint of him not just being available on the court, and also to the unethical, you know, moves and movements that they took to get this guy in their organization. I'm just not sure what we're seeing right now from Los Angeles, man. And so, to me, you know, James Harden, I'm not surprised. You know, I mean, this guy's always going to turn coat on you every single time. I mean, think about how many times we've seen this play over and over and over and over again, whether it's the Brooklyn situation, whether it's the Houston situation. And so, at the end of the day, man, you know, I can't really blame James Harden, because you kind of know what you get with this guy. A guy that when the going get tough, or when he feel like, hey, it's all about me, he gonna exit stage left. He gonna force his way out of town. And this guy has done it 800 million times at this point. So, you know, that's big news down the turnpike. You know, if I had to grade it, which I don't like really giving out grades because I think it's, you know, meets to be the eye, I'll just say this. I actually like what the Los Angeles Clippers was able to actually do in this deal. And at least at minimum, you get you an all-star caliber guard, you know, and you can kind of reset your organization a little bit. But now, you know, I think for this season, I think they really kind of, you know, punted on this season. Because one thing I will say about James Harden was he was playing good basketball. And also, too, I thought that the Clippers had a shot at getting into the play-in, and maybe, depending on, you know, just the matchups in the West, maybe have a puncher's chance of maybe getting into the playoffs and maybe getting out around maybe. Now I just think they punt on the season, you know, and so we'll see. I'm not sure what other draft picks and, you know, other compensation, because this thing came right down the pipeline, so excuse me, y'all, just for that. But it's just going to be interesting to just see, you know, what both these teams do moving forward as well. Also, other big news, man. We got my man Triple J, Jaren Jackson Jr., man. Last days up in Memphis, man. He's moving on to the Utah Jazz. You know, this is a deal that, you know, pretty much just looking at it, it's just really the Memphis Grizzlies, man, just going ahead and hitting the reset button. You know, they're getting a few draft picks in this, you know, first round draft picks in this deal. I thought it was the smart thing to do for the Memphis Grizzlies because, you know, Triple J is all right, man. I ain't got nothing wrong to say about Triple J. To me, just shoot too many jumpers. You know, and I just think that, you know, for me, Memphis, you got to kind of look at it from a situation where obviously at some point you're going to move on from Ja Morant. So you might as well tear this thing down. Yeah, I mean, we could just look at 2 years ago, whether it be, you know, Triple J, whether it be, you know, Ja Morant, whether it be Desmond Bane. And now two of them three dudes is gone. And the guy that's remaining in Ja Morant, which is the most notable guy out of the group, probably from a trade standpoint or a value standpoint, is he's the least valuable asset of all three of the guys. So I commend Memphis for saying, you know what, dude, we're in the West. At the end of the day, this thing is not working, man. Let's just go ahead and make this move, man, and get us 150 draft picks moving forward and just tear it down. You know, I feel real bad, though, for the fans of the Memphis Grizzlies, because what most people don't know across the country is that that's a fan base that represent 3 states. Not only, you know, the great state of Tennessee, but they also represent Arkansas, and they also, too, represent, you know, the state of Mississippi. And so just to see, you know, just those respective fans in that particular area and actually having a draw and having some kind of to the organization. Now they hit the reset button on that, man. So we'll definitely see what that do. That's just going to be interesting. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, man, is that Ja Morant probably going to be the next piece that moves. I don't know if he's going to be moved before the trade deadline. We're going to wait and see. Because obviously you got suitors out there. You got the Miami Heat out there. You got other couple suitors out there. But I just don't think that you're going to get, you probably get maybe 60 cents on the dollar right now for Ja Morant. Just simply due to, one, self-inflicted situation just off the field or off the court. Also, two, just, his health and just his game is taking just slightly a step back. Now, he's still a young guy, so I still think he has the ability to, pick up the pieces just on the court standpoint. But, it's just going to be interesting to see, man, what Memphis, do in that situation. Also, another trade coming down the pipeline, man. This is with my Chicago Bulls, the young Bulls, man. As you know, and obviously my fellow Chicagoans already know right now, man, I'm at odds with the organization. I just think that Arturas Karnisovas, who was the general manager, Mark Eversley, his right-hand man under him, I just think that both of these gentlemen are inept. I just think that they treat the organization like it's a small bodega, and you want in one of the biggest markets in all the sports across the world, not only the country. And so, this whole move with, trading, Nikola Vucevic, my man Vooch, getting Anthony Simons, not a bad move per se, but obviously the Bulls made another move, 3-team deal, which, I break down the minutia on that, but at the end of the day, the Bulls going to get, Mike Conley Jr., and I just think that at the end of the day, man, the Bulls, Jaden Ivey, obviously from the Detroit Pistons, or formerly the Detroit Pistons, coming over to Chicago as well. And to me, the Bulls are now in a situation where they got 8 million guards. 8 million guards. Now, obviously they dished out, got rid of Kevin Huerter, which I like actually Kevin Huerter. I thought he was able to shoot the basketball at a high clip for the Bulls, hit a couple game winners for the Bulls. I like the swag on him. And, some of my counterparts up in Chicago, I've been seeing some of the tea leaves. I'm not going to say that they like the move, but I think that the move is interesting. But to me, the whole biggest interesting piece in regards to the move is that now you waving bye-bye to probably Ayo as well as Kobe White. I don't expect both of these gentlemen to be on the roster past Thursday, which to me is sad. One, obviously, Ayo is a hometown product of Chicago, went to Morgan Park High School. Now, obviously started at the University of Illinois. Second team All-American that is years up at University of Illinois. And so, for me, it's just kind of sad for him to probably be gone, because at the end of the day, with Simons and Ivy, you got to pay both of these gentlemen. So I'm not sure if this the Bulls just trying to kind of bag it up. Obviously I've heard a little fire about, the Bulls potentially going after Giannis. I don't believe it. I still think the Bulls organization still got baby nuts out here. I just think that they make counterintuitive moves, and I just don't see them, going big game hunting. So, we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I surely doubt it. And so, obviously now the elephant in the room and the big domino, or the big joker, as we would say if we playing spades, is Giannis. And where will he fall? And will he be traded before Thursday? And to me, I don't know. I just think that Milwaukee now, word on the street is they're looking at a lot of these deals and they're countering a lot of these deals. So to me, if they're countering, I'm probably leaning more towards we might see Giannis in a new uniform before Thursday. To me, it's a lot of interesting pieces. A lot of people say, man, the Golden State Warriors is a good destination. I'll be honest, man, I just don't see it. I mean, now, if we're talking about maybe 3-4 years ago, yes. But at the end of the day, Steph Curry now is an older gentleman, man. He's 37 years old. Obviously got Jimmy Butler there, who's 36, 37 years old. He obviously out for the season with the ACL injury. You got Draymond Green, which, say if Giannis would go to Golden State, Draymond Green probably be out the door. He's an older guy now. Some of the younger pieces, you got to obviously include them in the deal to be able to get a guy like Giannis. Obviously they got draft picks and so forth. But I just think that Milwaukee is kind of playing what we call the long, smart game in this situation. Definitely trying to keep their cards to the vest and trying to make the best move that they can possibly make. So we'll definitely see what it do, man, moving forward just in that situation. And this thing could break. This thing could break before I even hit the press. But we'll see what it do, man. But I just think that I don't think that destination will be probably fruitful for all parties. As word on the street is, I hear Giannis is kind of getting a little trepidation about going out there, to San Francisco. But, we'll definitely see what it do. I actually believe that it might be in his best interest to go to San Antonio. Now, I think the Spurs got the requisite pieces to me and draft picks to be able to appease the Milwaukee Bucks. I think that, you put him and Wemby together. Obviously you got, a few guards, whether it be Fox, whether it be Harper. You keep your couple shooters in that mix. And we've seen what San Antonio have been able to do to Oklahoma City so far this season. And so that could be a real thing, man. That could be a real thing, man. So this thing is heating up, man. I'm going to break down a little bit more, man, before we get out of here, man. But I've definitely had to, get into, the nooks and crannies of, man, all this movement across the board as these trades are coming down the pipe, coming in hot, super hot. So we'll definitely see what it do, man. But first and foremost, man, I appreciate all the love and the feedback. I appreciate you. Yeah. We on Fire Sports Podcast. The spot. Man, before we get out of here, man, don't forget to check us out, man, on YouTube. We on Fire Sports Podcast. Also, too, on where all podcasts can be listened to. We definitely out here, man. We appreciate, like I said, again, all the love and all the feedback. Also, too, we on Facebook. We on Fire Sports Podcast. So, man, we up here and out here, man. And before we close the show out, man, like I said, I've been doing a lot of NBA talk, man, NBA trade deadline. Also, too, the NBA is going to take front stage, man, once we get out of Sunday, man, with the Super Bowl 60 presentation. Bad Bunny, doing the halftime show of Super Bowl 60. So it's definitely going to be up, man. Seattle Seahawks taking on the New England Patriots. And, Seahawks, man, coming into this game, man, they're 4-point favorites just in this one. You got Sam Darnold. You got, on the other side, Drake May. I think it's two great head coaches in this football game, man, for Mike Vrabel, also, too, Mike Macdonald. Both these guys are, defensive guys. I know all, some of my OGs remember when Vrabel, was a linebacker, for the, New England Pats. I remember Mike Vrabel when he's at Ohio State, going back into the, the mid and late 90s when yours truly was in college. So, I just think that, man, good head coaches, man. I think top to bottom, both these teams are pretty well balanced. A lot of people, think that, Seattle win this football game and the Patriots coming in as underdogs. I've seen the Patriots come into Super Bowl as an underdog before, many moons ago. The debut of Tom Brady and also to Bill Belichick, back, in 2001, when they took on the St. Louis Rams, definitely was a coordination night. Most people would believe for the then St. Louis Rams, and them getting knocked off, man. Adam Vinatieri kicking the big time field goal. Definitely remember that football game. I remember, John Madden saying on the telecast, him and the late great, Pat Summerall. That, the Patriots should play for overtime, and Tom Brady was able to get them down the field, Vinatieri kicking a field goal. And so, I think that the New England Pats, man, they're coming in as an underdog, but I think this is going to be a good matchup. I think it's also, too, man, a changing of the guard in the National Football League. We've had, the Philadelphia Eagles, won the Super Bowl last year, but, they made the Super Bowl, 2 out of the last, now 2 out of the last 4 years. Obviously had the Kansas City Chiefs, just out there making the Super Bowl over the last few years. And so, I just think that at the end of the day, it's good to see kind of some fresh blood into the Super Bowl. I don't think it has the heavyweight championship type of, vibe that we saw last year with, last year's Super Bowl number 59. But, I think it's going to be a nice little showing, nice little situation. Obviously, also, we've seen just, across the National Football League, a lot of coaches, making moves, a lot of hirings across the National Football League. And it kind of gets me, to this one stopping point with the NFL, man. It's just kind of sad to see still minority head coaches not get their just due. Guys not having the opportunity to, get the head coaching job in the National Football League. We seen, Mike Tomlin step down from the Pittsburgh Steelers. It looks like he's going to take a ceremonious, year off. But outside of that, it's just one of those situations, man, to where I think it's just time for the National Football League, man, to give just black head coaches more opportunity. Now, I'm one to believe that, hey, the best man for the job is the best man for the job. I don't want to shed, any negative light, on the, on my, Caucasian and white brothers who got their jobs, because a lot of these guys deserve to be head coaches in the National Football League. So I ain't tripping on that. But I just think that at the end of the day, man, when you look across the whole landscape of the National Football League and just see a bevy of NFL teams without, say a man of color, whether it be a black brother, just a minority, just with a head coaching job, Yeah, you know what they say, NFL, Lucy, you got some explaining to do. And so I just think that, you know, that's a poignant situation, man, that I think needs to be shed light on. Also, just with Bill Belichick not getting into the Hall of Fame, man. Bill Belichick, in my opinion, is one of the greatest coaches in the National Football, in the history of the National Football League. You know, I've been hearing a lot of chatter, you know, just thinking about, you know, people saying, you know, he was a cheater, he wasn't good with the press. But at the end of the day, man, getting into the Hall of Fame is about what you was able to contribute to the sport. And you talking about a guy that has 8 Super Bowl rings, 2 of them as the defensive coordinator of the New York Giants. I'll never forget the job that he did in Super Bowl 25, man, with the Giants took on the Buffalo Bills. And I just remember this guy, man, putting about 800 linebackers on the field, man, just was able to stifle the Buffalo Bills offense. You know, obviously they was able to win that football game, you know, Super Bowl 25, one of the best Super Bowls I've seen, you know, just in this collective of now going into the 60th Super Bowl. And, you know, 6 with the New England Patriots as the head coach of the New England Patriots. I mean, Bill Belichick should be sidestepping his way straight to the Hall of Fame. Obviously, he'll get in there eventually. You know, it's just been a whole big uproar just as far as the Veterans Committee and just the older players who pretty much, you know, didn't get what many people say a fair opportunity to get a crack at, you know, the Hall of Fame. Guys like, you know, Roger Craig, guys like L.C. Greenwood, who, you know, straight OGs, man. You know, Roger Craig, got a chance to see him play, you know, in the 1980s for the, you know, San Francisco 49ers, moved on to the, you know, the Los Angeles Raiders at the time. You know, and obviously L.C. Greenwood, man, just being, you know, one of the most fiercest, you know, defensive players, man, back in that steel curtain era of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Definitely one of the best defenses I've ever seen, man. You know, right at, you know, at the time, you know, I was coming up watching football. You know, he was on the back end of his career, man. Just great, you know, just teams that Pittsburgh Steelers and great defenses that they had. So I'm not going to say that these gentlemen are not deserving to get into the National Football League Hall of Fame. But at the end of the day, man, Bill Belichick, if he ain't a first ballot Hall of Famer, something's wrong with the process. Also, Robert Kraft not getting in as an owner. Come on, man. This guy, you know, his team is presently in the Super Bowl as we speak here right now. Him not getting into the Hall of Fame, man, I think it's a travesty. I think that the National Football League and the Hall of Fame committee, they need to just kind of, you know, reshape just kind of the voting process and all of this, man. And so we'll definitely see what it do. But at the end of the day, man, you know, I want to thank you guys for tuning in to another episode of We on Fire Sports Podcast, The Spot. Coming up, man, on Friday, man, we're going to break this thing down again, man. I'm really going to get into the Super Bowl, my Super Bowl predictions and so forth. And also, too, we might have some more exciting trades coming down the pipeline, man, after the trade deadline concludes on Thursday for the National Basketball Association, man. So, first and foremost, man, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for checking in, and I'll be right back at you at the back end of the week. We on Fire Sports Podcast. The Spot.